Howdy YouTube, Connor the Grumpy Grognard again. We're going to talk a little bit more about Open Legends, and this time we're going to talk about exploding dice. So before you get your brooms and dustpans out, let me do a bit of an explanation. Most other games, including Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder, when you roll the highest on a die, that's pretty much just it. So if you roll an 8 on a d8 or a 6 on a d6, congratulations, you've maxed out your die. The only time this usually ever changes is if, let's say, you roll a 20 on a 20-sided dice, in which case you might have something called a critical hit. But typically even that is just a 20. That's as high as you can get. Which for those games is fine because they have static limiters. Things like things such as attack bonuses and bonuses from magical items and spells and whatnot. And in Open Legend we don't have any of that. All we have are the dice. There's no such thing as a +1 to hit or a -1 to hit. You just roll more dice and hope you get an explosion. An explosion is when you roll the maximum number on a die, you keep that number and roll that die again until you no longer make a maximum number. So let's say you're rolling 3d4 plus a d20, and on your d20 you roll an 18, and then one of the 4s is a 3, the next one is a 1, then you've rolled a magical 4 again. Now you'd keep your 18, your 1, and your 3 for a total of what would that be? 22. Then you'd add your 4 for a total of 26, and you'd roll that last d4 one more time. If you rolled another 4, congratulations, keep on rolling, it's going to get only higher. If you rolled like another 2, for example, you'd settle in a nice even 26. Now, what this means in terms of the game goes back to every roll matters, okay? So let's say you have to make a challenge rating roll of 12, or your character is going to get poisoned, right? You have a 1 in Fortitude, which would, in Open Legend, give you a d4 on your die, okay? The snake has bitten you, you roll your d20 and your d4. Now on your d20, let's say you've rolled a 7, okay? Oh shoot, you think to yourself, I can't possibly make that CR of 12 because I've only got a d4 to make up for it. Well, let's say you roll that d4 and you roll a 4. Now, at this moment in time, you're sitting on a pretty low 11. You've at this point failed your check. However, sorry about that, you've rolled an explosion on your die. So now you've taken that 11, you roll your d4 again, and let's say you roll a 2. Whether you rolled a 1 or a 2, at this point it doesn't matter because you're going to meet that natural 12. So in Open Legend, what an exploding die means, and what the exploding die mechanic means, is that even if you roll low on your 20-sided die, which is typically the die that is going to mean the most, it actually kind of doesn't. Which is also where advantage and disadvantage comes really into play. Advantage means you roll more dice and you keep a smaller amount, hoping for more explosions. On the inverse, disadvantage means you're going to roll more dice and keep the lower scores, still hoping for some explosions, but you're not going to probably get them. So let's take that example of trying to climb that rope again. There's a feat called Skill Specialization, okay? And it gives you advantage when you're doing a skill tied to an attribute. In this case, we'll make it a might. So, skill advantage on might checks will take skill advantage 2, and you have a might of 1. So what this means is you're going to roll one 20-sided die. You're going to roll your normal 1d4 sided die for your might, and then two additional d4 dice for your skill specialization. You will keep the highest die, singular die. This comes into play when you have more than one attribute die as well. So for example, let's have our might be, say, a 5. You're rolling 2d6 plus an additional 2d6, keeping only your attribute score worth of dice. So in our first example, we're only going to keep one d4 out of those 3. In the second situation, when we have a might of 5, we're going to keep 2d6 out of the 4d6 we roll. Now, if you have advantage, you'd keep the highest of the 2 rolls. If you had disadvantage 2, you would keep the lowest of the 2 rolls. So making up numbers again, let's say we rolled a 3 on our check to climb the rope with our d20 dice. Okay. Our first d4 is a 1. Our second d4 is a 3. Oh, we've only got 6. However, our last d4 is a 4 again. So now we've got 3 plus 4 is 7. Oh shoot, you say, I can't possibly make that 12 that I need. Well, you roll that d4 one more time because it is an advantage die. Now, unlike your regular dice, your exploding dice do not have advantage. Okay, it's something you really need to be clear on. Exploding dice do not gain advantage normally. There are feats that allow it, but they're rare. So you roll that d4 again, you roll a 4 again. Oh shoot, you say, I'm at 7, plus 4 is 11, I still can't make my check. Well, your die exploded for the second time in a row. You roll that die again, and it doesn't matter because you've reached 12 and higher. Now, if we take those 2d6 and we do the same thing, okay? You roll a 3 on your d20. You roll a 6, a 6, a 5, and a 1. Because you have advantage 2, you'd keep your 2 highest dice, both 6s. So now you've got 3 plus 12, 3 plus 6 plus 6 is 15. You would keep rolling those dice. And now let's say you reach 30 or higher, you do a spectacular shimmy up the rope, and in fact, as you're climbing, you're tying extra knots for all your buddies. That's another thing that exploding dice can do for you, is when you roll super high, your DM is also encouraged to give you smaller bonuses. So whereas you rolled up with your advantage 2 because of your skill in your feats, maybe the rest of your party gains an advantage 1 because you were tying knots in the rope to help them climb up. Now let's take that disadvantage roll. Okay, we've got 1d4 with a disadvantage of 2. You roll a 10 on your d20. Now you roll 3d4. Okay, first d4 comes up as a 4. Yes, you say, this is amazing, we've done a great job. Second d4 is a 3. We still pass. Your last d4 is a 1. Now you're sitting at 11 because you take the lowest of that die, because you have one attribute die, because you have a 1d4, and your 2 highest dice are thrown away. That's what disadvantage does. Conversely, with the d6s, right, you roll an 8. And on your you roll an 8 with your d20. On your first d6, you roll a 5. Your second d6, you roll a 4. Your third d6, you roll a 1. And your last d6, you roll a 2. You would get rid of your 5, you get rid of your 6, you would keep the 2 and the 1, plus your 8 would be at 11. You failed to climb the rope, or you failed to meet the CR, in which case, success with a twist, or, sorry about that again, success with a twist, or failing forward come into play. Success with a twist, you climb the rope, but as you climb up, the last bit of the rope has fallen, it's become untied, you're the only one able to use that rope to get up, and the rope is now at the bottom of whatever you're trying to climb. Failing forward, you're halfway up whatever you're trying to climb, and the rope snaps, you cause, say, a landslide, and while nobody can climb up the sheer rock face that you're trying to climb, you've opened up a tunnel that was, before now, unknown. Okay? So, in all of these cases, the exploding dice come into play. Okay? So, when you're playing your games of Open Legend, and your players, or your DM, gets frustrated because they start rolling low on their d20s, just remember, all it takes is a single d4 to explode a few times, and you've already succeeded. And so that's pretty much where I'm going to leave you guys. Just remember, exploding dice are a really cool thing. They really can help give a more epic feel to your game. When you're dealing damage to a creature, Exploding dice are amazing because then you produce banes or you dispel boons and you deal all this extra damage. It becomes really exciting. When you're doing normal challenges, it's the same thing. So just remember that they're there, and it'll be so much more exciting. Alright, so please take care. Remember to subscribe, and we'll catch you on the flip side.